Welcome to the Delight Your Marriage podcast, the show where you hear from amazing and inspiring wives sharing their struggles, triumphs, and advice for this journey called marriage. Here's your host, Belah Rose.
Hello there, and thank you so much for joining me on the Delight Your Marriage podcast. I think this matters that you're here to not only your marriage, but I think it matters to God because the way that we are in our marriage and the way that we love our spouse matters to Him. And today we're going to be talking about being engaged as a wife intimately. And that matters because, it's sometimes hard to turn off the noise in the background of our mind and actually be present. And I think Jay Dee, my guest today, has got a lot of really good insights that we can learn from. But before we dive into that, I want to usually I've been reading an iTunes review, and I want to just take this moment to thank those of you that pray for DYM. There's some people that have contacted me from all the way from South Africa to Canada to the East Coast of the United States that have agreed, and the West Coast actually, now that I'm thinking about it, that have contacted me and said that they're praying for the program. And I am so encouraged by that because this is truly difficult work. It's not something that's easy to talk about or easy to present. And sometimes it's hard for me to even present this work for you. And I want to, and I work hard at it, but sometimes it's a challenge. So I just want to thank you so much for your prayers. And this is changing lives by God's grace. And I just want to appreciate you for being a part of it. So anyway, let's go ahead and dive into the content today. I think it's going to be really powerful for you. Jay's got some awesome tips about intimacy and being engaged as a wife. So let's dive in. All right. Well, welcome back, Delight Your Marriage listener. I'm really excited to have Jay Dee here. He's from sexwithinmarriage.com. And this is actually his second time on the Delight Your Marriage podcast. So thank you for being here, Jay.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I'm really excited. And the first time I had you on was episode 4 and 5. And we've done just about 70 episodes since then. So it's really exciting to have you back on. But if anyone wants to go back and listen to his story, you can go ahead and listen to that on episode 4 and 5. But today, Jay is here because he's got a brand new course that he has out. And the name of that course, let me see if I can get it right. It's Becoming a More Sexually Engaged Wife. Is that right?
Close enough. It's Becoming More Sexually Engaged for Christian Wives. But your title would actually be better.
Well, no, that's great. And I think that's a really great topic to tackle. And I mean, we're just going to dive in and talk about it. So so first off, how does being engaged sexually benefit you in the experience? How does it benefit a wife?
I found when talking to wives, a lot of them, they kind of said that they felt sex was for their husband and not for themselves. And so a lot of times they wouldn't be engaged in the activity. They would be just like, okay, I'm here, do what you want with me kind of thing.
Right.
But I think they miss out on so much then. When they can be more engaged and actually realize that they've been created to be a sexual being as well, they can draw a lot more pleasure from it and also be a lot more connected, and it can be more of a shared experience instead of this is something I'm doing for you. Because I think too many wives see it as a sacrifice, that whole just lie back and think of England kind of mentality from the Victorian era.
Yes. Yeah. Now, when you say being a sexual being, what do you mean by that?
I mean, I believe God created men and women to both be sexual. That it wasn't just, okay, here the guys are the sexual ones and the women have the babies. I don't think that's the way it worked out. In fact, if you read through the Bible and you read through a lot of the old like really old Jewish writings about the Bible and about their tradition. In the Old Testament, the assumption was always that the woman was the more sexual being.
Really?
Yeah, and like the women were required kind of by rabbinic law to provide children to the husband, but the husband was required by law to provide sex to the wife. That was
Wow.
his responsibility. Even so,
Wow.
like in the Old Testament, when they took on more than one wife on those strange circumstances, like when they were at war or when their brother died or whatever, they were allowed to so long as they didn't deprive their prior wife of sex and food and
Oh, wow.
shelter. Those were their rules. And all a wife had to do basically is say, "He's denying me sex," and she could get a divorce. It was
Wow.
that important.
Wow. Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
Huh. Why do you think it's gotten so switched now?
Uh, Personally, I think it's because of a lot of our history of Christianity.
Yeah.
Um, During the whole when Jesus was around and the whole Roman and Greek era, there was a lot of bad teachings that got brought into Christianity that didn't really have any
Mm.
place to be there. Like there's this whole idea of dualism where there's this teaching in Greek that the body was kind of evil and the spirit was what was good, and
Mm.
that sort of made its way into Christianity, and the church picked it up for a very long time. That
Yeah.
all pleasure was considered bad. Um, you were supposed to live like almost an ascetic life,
Yeah.
enjoy nothing, and just focus on prayer, basically.
Yeah.
But I don't think that was ever the way it was intended.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, um, okay. So then kind of leading us to present day, why is it so hard to be engaged in sex for a wife?
I think a lot of those mentalities still exist, and they
Yeah.
were really strong. Like during the whole Victorian era, they got out of hand. So bad that I've heard reports of they used to put coverings on the furniture legs because they were considered too sexual.
Oh, I've heard that.
Uh, like that's how far away from like healthy sexuality we got, and
Yes.
it hasn't been that long that we've wiped that from our memory, kind of thing. Like that mentality still is there,
Mm. Yeah.
and it's starting to slowly die, but churches are doing a really bad job of teaching. Um, well, we do a really good job of teaching people don't have sex, and then we do a
Right.
really bad job of teaching them, okay, now you're married, go have sex and
Right.
have lots of it
Right.
and enjoy it. So I think
Right.
we need
Right.
to change our message from don't have sex to wait to have really good sex.
Yes. I love that. Wait to have really good sex. That's the point. Um, awesome. Well, okay. So I have to ask the elephant in the room. As a man, what made you tackle this topic for women?
Um, I get asked that question a lot, actually. And the the first reason was just that I got asked so many times by wives sending me emails saying, okay, we've had a marriage for X number of years. Some of them are a couple, some of them are decades. I just realized how important sex is, and
Yeah.
now I have no idea what to do.
Yeah.
Because they've realized, okay, this is an important thing. I need to invest in it. Great. How do I do that?
Yeah.
Because it's not something they feel like they can go to their pastor and ask them for help, or to their friends or their family or anybody. And they've spent, in some cases, decades avoiding sex or just
Mm.
lying there. And so they're like, I don't even know how to start. I don't know what to
Yeah.
do. My brain just can't come up with anything in that, like, in that direction. So what
Yeah.
do I do? So after I probably got a few dozen emails like this over the last few years, I figured, well, me as a guy, we're pretty engaged in sex generally. So maybe I could write something to say, hey, this is what your husband might appreciate from you.
Yeah.
And so, but And at first I thought, okay, well, this is just going to be like a how-to of techniques and tips and things like that. And it changed into this whole other thing about going right back to, who are you as a person and what's the biblical perspective on sex and beauty and marriage and all this stuff. So, like, we don't really even talk that much about sex for the first couple of chapters,
Mm,
because more of it is about the wife as an individual
yeah.
and how her husband sees her and how God sees
Mm.
her and how you should see yourself.
Oh, that's good. Why do you think that's so important for a wife to understand how she's viewed not only by her husband, but by God?
I think, first, I think it's very important for us to know who we are.
Yeah.
I think that's something in our culture that we've lost a lot of. Um, we've kind of forgotten that we were created by God for purposes. We get too
Mm,
wrapped up in our own lives with our own goals, and we get taught a lot of bad stuff along the way. I want to work on another course for men because I think men have completely lost, for the most part, what it is to be a man. Because
mm,
we're not being taught anymore, and women, I think, are being taught bad teachings as well about how to be a woman, how to be a wife, and that they were created to be sexual,
mm.
and that it's a good thing. Like, one of the first things God said is like, okay, I made you two, and then they went and had sex, basically. Like, that's the way the Bible kind of reads, you know.
It's
Uh,
true.
and
Yeah.
so, yeah, I just think there's a lot of bad teachings surrounding this, or a complete lack of teaching in a lot of cases. I know you shared your
Yeah.
story on your podcast about how you got no teaching, and your first kind of introduction was in grade school, right?
Right,
Was a kid
right.
in your class, and that, I think that's hurting a lot of marriages.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. Yes. So, all right. So when a wife is trying to be engaged more, why is it engaged instead of something else, like be more sexy or be more um, attractive or something along those lines? Why is engagement so important?
Uh, I think engagement is ultimately what makes a woman really sexy.
Mm,
My wife could be wearing the exact same thing, but if she has an attitude of, hey, let's get together, that's way more sexy than, okay, come here and I'm going to lie here. It's not about what she's wearing or about how she looks necessarily, but
yeah.
her attitudes and her actions, you know, even, even the actions, she could do the exact same actions, but with that mentality behind it that I'm not really here, I'm not really present, or this is just for you. And not to say that you can't do things sometimes that I'm like, oh, I'm just going to do this for you. Um,
Right.
but even that can be done in an engaged way,
Yeah.
where, like, I'm going to do this for you, but I'm going to enjoy your pleasure, kind of thing, rather than
Yeah.
I'm just going to do this so you'll be happy and leave me alone.
Yeah. 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 Exactly.
That's why
Yeah.
I think
Which,
being engaged is crucial.
mm, well, and that is the state of a lot of marriages, is where one spouse, generally the wife, is just being there for it, not really enjoying it at all. And then, of course, she doesn't want to have it very often because it's such a drag on what's going on for her. So this also would help her to engage more often, and want to engage more often. Is that right?
Yeah. I also go through kind of what happens with all our hormones and everything when we have sex and how long that lasts, and what are the side of the if you're having sex frequently, what are the effects of that with our hormones, and how do those play out in your life? And then if you're not having sex frequently, well, what are the effects of those hormones dropping off, and how does that play out in your life?
Do you mind telling us a little bit about that?
I don't mind telling you.
Yeah.
Okay, so it happens a lot more for men. Uh,
Okay.
the primary hormone that I've been looking at most of the time is oxytocin. And for those that don't know, oxytocin is considered the bonding hormone. It's what makes you feel a connection to someone.
Right.
So, for example, you get massive doses, well, you, as in women, get massive
Right.
doses of oxytocin when you give birth. And
Mm.
it's what makes you kind of go, okay, all this was worthwhile because now I have my baby. And it's what
Mm.
gives you that feeling like it's my baby. And again,
Mm.
when you breastfeed, you get massive doses of oxytocin.
Mm.
Again, because, well, honestly, breastfeeding looks like a chore. But
Yeah.
I see my wife do it, and she just looks down and she's like in awe because she's just dripping in oxytocin, right?
Mm. Yeah, I hear
And she's
that.
just like, "Oh no, this is completely worth it, and it's it's no trouble at all," kind of thing.
Yeah. I actually miss breastfeeding. It's a special experience. It really is.
Yeah, and I've heard that from a lot of women, and as a guy, I look at them like, that looks like a lot of work. Like, it
Yeah.
looks irritating to have someone attached to you so often.
Right.
But we don't get that benefit of all that oxytocin.
Yeah,
Uh,
that makes sense.
so women have, I can't remember if it's 7 times or 11 times. It's one of those. It's in my notes, but I'm working
Yeah.
from memory. They have between 7 and 11 times the oxytocin that men have in their system all the time.
Mm. Wow.
And so that's tends to be why women are more caring and more compassionate and more emotionally bonding. They bond easier to other people. They make stronger relationships, things like that.
Yeah.
Men, we basically are oxytocin deprived most of the time.
Yeah.
And until we have sex, as soon as we orgasm, it jumps to, and I can't remember if it's the 7 or 11 times stat, but basically it jumps through the roof.
Yeah.
And it only happens when we have an orgasm. I mean, there's a slight
Mm.
increase when we have sex, and everyone says, oh, you get oxytocin from hugging and from kissing and from touching and sitting near each other. And that's true, but it's nowhere near the same levels.
Mm.
And as soon as we have sex, it lasts for like a half an hour and then it starts dropping off. And you really, as a guy, most of us only feel kind of those effects for a day or two, maybe 3.
Yeah.
And then we start feeling like, I don't feel connected anymore. I don't feel bonded anymore. And then if it goes too long, we start thinking, she doesn't really care for me. She doesn't love me. And
Mm.
often women kind of misread this to think, oh, all he wants is sex. But really
Right.
what he's wanting is intimacy and connected, like a connection.
Right.
Because we have so little oxytocin in our system most of the time, it's really hard for us to form those kind of connections.
Mm. Yeah.
So that's my whole spiel on oxytocin in sex.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's really good. Um, I love, I love, I love oxytocin. I'm thankful for that hormone.
That's why
Good. Okay. Well, uh-huh.
if you can keep them awake after sex, they tend to become
Right.
a lot more chatty because they feel emotionally connected and they feel bonded and they feel safe
Yeah.
and they feel like they can be vulnerable. And so if you can manage to keep them awake, you can have an amazing conversation right after sex.
Mm. Yeah, yep, I hear that. It's true. That's good. Well, I love you can tell that Jay kind of takes the perspective of the female even while he's, talking. He's able to kind of, jump into her shoes. So, just a little insight into what's coming further with his course. But well, can I ask the big question and see how you do, see what you say to it? But the question is, how do you become more engaged as a wife?
uh, I don't think it's one like simple trick.
Yeah.
Uh, if it was, it would be very easy because you could just go around to everybody and go, and this is what you need to do, and now you're good.
Right.
Um,
Right. Right.
but that's
Exactly.
why I broke this course up into like 8 different modules or chapters or whatever you want to call them, because uh, it's a lot of little pieces,
Yeah.
from understanding why it is that your husband wants sex to what were you created for, to do with this whole sex thing, and how do we communicate about sex, and what does passion look like, and
Yeah.
how do you initiate, and what are your boundaries, and are they good boundaries, or are they just
Mm.
boundaries because you don't want to grow? Which ones are attached to moral things and which ones aren't? And
Mm.
there's so much in it, and we go through all this stuff. There's also scheduling issues that people have today because everyone is so busy,
Yeah.
and sex just kind of like, oh yeah, we'll do that later when we're not tired or not exhausted
Yeah.
or not busy, or you don't have a
Yeah.
meeting or whatever.
Yeah. I just was thinking about this yesterday and just, I mean, you really put into sex, or you get out of sex what you put into it a lot of times. So if you are actually putting in the hour and a half and say, okay, we're going to actually have a really great experience, then you're going to get out a really great experience versus, the 15 minutes or the 10 minutes that you've got. You're just going to, half-hearted do it. It's a different experience. You won't get the same out. I mean, it's still worthwhile. It's still, especially for men, it's still worthwhile. But for the woman, in terms of what she's going to get out of sex, it's often what she puts into it in the first place.
Yeah, especially with that whole orgasm gap idea that men can have an orgasm in whatever the stats are. They change every year, but somewhere between 2 to 10 minutes, and
Yeah.
women tend to take more like the 10 to 20 minutes,
Mm,
30
right.
or more,
Right. Right.
depending on a variety of things.
Do you know? Can I just ask you on the spot? And if you don't, it's fine. But um, so women get a lot out of the touching, and the oxytocin release is really a lot of the foreplay is where she gets most of her oxytocin release. But do you know what happens with her for orgasm? Is it still an oxytocin release, and it's just not as much as foreplay, or it's comparable, or do you have an idea about that?
I honestly don't know. I
Yeah, I don't
remember
either.
reading a study on it once, and I'm guessing it wasn't something noticeable, or else I would have remembered it.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
the man's one, I was just like, oh my goodness, look at that.
right, right,
And that stuck in my head for years. I mean, it was years ago I read the study,
right.
but I haven't seen anything like that for women.
Yeah. It's interesting because a lot of times women think that they're not a whole person if they're not able to orgasm, or orgasm has to be a certain way in sex, or just we just act like orgasm is this huge thing for women. But I guess I'm trying to say that it's not that orgasms are not important. They are, and they're a wonderful part of the experience of the whole sexual experience, but it's not the biggest, most important thing for women. And I guess I'd like to also address those women that haven't orgasmed before. If you would like to, and figure out and understand your body in that way, there's definitely ways to do that. And I would suggest one of the easiest ways to learn is to start out using a vibrator, and then your body can learn in different ways how to orgasm. But if you are interested in trying a vibrator, you can go to delightyourmarriage.com/resources, and there I have a resource which is Christian's a site that doesn't have any gross pictures or anything nasty, but is just clean, and I also have some recommendations for you. So that might be something to try out, because I would love for every woman to have the experience of orgasm. Just realize that you are not a broken person or missing out on something monumental. It's a great part of the experience, but it's not the whole enchilada, if you will. So those are my thoughts there.
Yeah, no, I agree. The stats I've seen are that women, on average, tend to orgasm 1/3 of the time that men do, and
Yeah.
most of them seem to be happy with that.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
I've even had kind of played with this as like the male side, and been like, okay,
Yeah.
well, what is sex life if I don't have an orgasm, but she does more often?
Mm.
And so some nights I'll just be like, okay, forget me. This is going to be
Yeah.
focused on you.
Yeah.
And frankly, I still have a fantastic time.
Yes. That's awesome. Good. Okay. Well, in talking about how to be more engaged, can you give like maybe two or three thoughts that women usually miss that they should really make sure they focus in on?
Sure. Let's see, two or three. Understanding how your spouse sees it.
Mm,
Too often we approach sex as in like just from our perspective,
yeah.
or at worst we make an assumption about our spouse's perspective
Yeah.
without actually talking to them and asking them. And that's why I put in like a whole chapter about communication and sex.
Mm,
Because I think I've talked to so many couples that are like, yep, we're having sex regularly. And I'm like, great, are you talking about it? And they're like, no, we've never had a conversation about sex. And I'm
never.
like, you can have sex 2 to 3 times a week, and that's going fine, but you can't talk about it?
Oh
Like,
my
how is that?
gosh.
And they're like,
Right.
no, we've never even mentioned the word sex before, I don't think, to each other. Like,
Wow. Wow.
and and I get it. I mean, in some ways, talking about it is more intimate than actually doing it.
Mm,
Um, because
yeah.
then it's not just your body involved, but now your thoughts and your emotions are involved as well. And
Yeah.
in our day, that those are more closely guarded than our bodies, I think.
Mm,
That, well, it's okay, we can have sex, but I'm not going to let you into my mind, kind of, or into my heart.
yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
that's kind of
It's
a very
powerful.
sad statement to make for a couple who's been married for a long amount of time. Like, I kind of get it for newlyweds who are just still
Yeah.
trying to learn to be vulnerable together, but
Yeah.
there are a lot of people who've been married for decades who they're still not really intimate.
Mm, yeah.
So I think talking about it and communicating and understanding, this is what sex means to me, and this is, how I approach it, and this is how my mind works. Because I've learned over the years, my wife's perspective on sex is completely different than mine. They
Mm,
could not be more different,
yeah.
uh, uh, as far as I know. and
Yeah.
and that's, I'm not sure I'll ever really understand how she sees and approaches and thinks about sex, or what it feels like to her, or anything. But I'm going to do my best to try and figure it out.
Mm,
Because every time I learn something, I can figure out a way to make it better for her, which in turn makes it better for me.
mm-hmm.
And it makes it more of a connection rather than just a physical activity.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's one big one. Uh, Two more.
Yeah.
Uh, I think one of the things that I hear most often from men, even if they're having sex regularly, is that their husband or their wife is never initiating, or initiates extremely rarely.
Mm,
And, you know, I think many wives are very scared of that.
mm,
They don't know how to initiate. They don't know what initiation means, because a lot of
yeah.
the time, like, you'll ask the husband, and he's like, "No, she never initiates," and she's like, "I initiate all the time. Just the other day, I was waiting for you." And he's like, "That's not initiating. That's just being receptive." Like,
Yeah.
um,
Yep.
so I think there's this big struggle between what is initiating, what is not. So one of the units in my course is, I didn't write a whole lot in that one. Honestly, I took comments from, I think it's about 100 husbands who answered a survey that I posted
Oh,
up
wow.
saying, what does initiating mean to you? What does it
Oh, that's
look
awesome.
like, and how does it make you feel, and all these things. And I just posted the comments, and
I
it's
want
one
to
of the
read that.
longest units. And
Mm-hmm.
and so many of the wives who went through the course said, I had no idea.
Mm,
That was amazing. Like, just to see their perspective,
wow.
because too many of them, they're not talking about sex, so they have no idea.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of them said, "Wow, I thought I'd been initiating for years, and I haven't ever."
Oh, wow.
So that's it's very cool to see feedback like that,
Yes.
and to be able to see people's lives changing and for the better.
Yeah.
And once they did it, I mean, all the wives said, "Yeah, it's scary, but it was really good."
Yes. Yes.
And
Mm-hmm.
the more often you try it and the more you do it, the more comfortable it becomes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
And it's more enjoyable for the wife a lot of times because she gets her head in the game
yeah,
and it's enjoyable that way.
and I've also found that, a lot of times men, they think they know what they want, but they don't really know what they want.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them, I hear them and they're like, no, no, I want her to initiate every time. And then later, if it actually happens, he's like, you know what? I don't want her to initiate every time. Sometimes I want to.
Yeah.
And so it seems to be that somewhere in the like 10% to 30% kind of range is like where men like their wives to initiate. So it doesn't need to be like all the time.
Yeah.
It's just once in a while, and then they these husbands, they feel so appreciated when that happens
Mm.
because they feel like their wives actually desire them.
Mm. Wow. It's really cool to hear that a husband feels appreciated by a wife initiating. That I mean, for women, that's not normal for us to think. Um, but that he's being appreciated by us initiating sex. It's cool.
Yeah, probably the number one comment I got about the course from wives was um, them saying, I thought this was just about like the physical act of sex, that
Mm.
all he wanted was to feel good.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's what he wants, is to feel good, but you're on the wrong level. Like the
Mm.
physical aspect of it, it's fun and it's entertaining and it's exciting, but the emotional connection and the appreciation and everything else, that is worth 100 times the physical sensations.
Mm. That's awesome.
And
That's
many of them
awesome.
never didn't have a clue. They thought there was absolutely no emotional aspect to it whatsoever.
Mm. Yep. That's awesome.
Actually, a lot of them had their husbands read some of them, and their husbands like, "Yeah, that's how I feel." And
Mm.
she's like, "Why didn't you tell me?" And he's like, "You never asked." Like,
Yeah, right. Or I
so
thought you knew
men are
this
just
or
as bad. We
something.
don't communicate well either.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Oh my gosh. Well, sounds like an awesome course, Jay, and I'm really grateful for everything that you shared on the podcast. And do you have any last thoughts for us?
uh, my last thoughts. I think my last one would be that too often I find couples think that sex becomes boring after a while.
Mm.
And so I wrote one of our chapters on like becoming more adventurous during sex. And I don't mean like doing crazy things. You don't have to like buy whips or chains or have sex in a park or anything like that. Because when you
Uh-huh.
go online and you're like, how to spice up your sex life, and you get some crazy and often dangerous responses.
Right, right.
So, but I've often said to people, and I kind of put this in the unit, that, monogamy doesn't need to result in monotony.
Mm. Yeah.
That if you can learn which boundaries of yours are good and wholesome and which ones are just you being scared to grow, then you can start to push some of these boundaries that are, not bad to be pushed upon.
Mm. Yeah, that's
And
good.
once after a while, you kind of get a repertoire of all these things that you can do together, and you can cycle through them, and it never gets old, and you still keep figuring out and learning stuff if you're communicating and if you're willing to try things, if you're willing to push boundaries.
Mm.
Um, then I think that's, too many people, they just say, we just do the same thing over and over and over again, and
Right.
well, stop, do something else.
That's right. No, that's great. Awesome. Cool. Well, Jay, thank you so much for all this. This is really great. And for you listener, if you would like the course, you can just go to delightyourmarriage.com/72, and that's the number 72. And actually, Jay has been generous enough to give us a really significant discount if you purchase before the end of November 2015. So I'd encourage you to go to delightyourmarriage.com/72 and get this course. It could be fantastic for your marriage. But Jay, thank you so much. This has really been fun, and I appreciate all your wisdom and advice.
No problem. I always enjoy talking to you.
Gosh, thank you, Jay. And I just appreciate all of his insights. But if you are inspired by this, I just want to encourage you that this is exactly what intimacy is meant to be, of two spouses really enjoying the experience, because God made it pleasurable on purpose. It's supposed to be a pleasure and a joy and ultimately unification of the husband and the wife. So I'd encourage you, go get that course, delightyourmarriage.com/72. I've gone through it myself, and there's so many great insights that I didn't know myself. And he talks a lot about science-y things that I think is cool, but he also talks practically, and there's challenges in there for you, and it's a great course. So I'd encourage you to do that. Otherwise, Jay and I are actually hosting a webinar together. If you haven't gone to one of my webinars before, I would encourage you to come. My last webinar, actually, I received some feedback from a wife that's been married over 25 years, and she says that, Belah, this work is of God. It is very good. Thank you. This webinar is so important. I hope it reaches every married woman. So very cool. I hope that you would be able to come. Go to delightyourmarriage.com/webinar and join us there. Otherwise, thank you so much again for listening, and I just encourage you to engage this week, that your intimacy would be at a greater level of intimacy, really. Anyway, I'm praying for you. God bless you, and we'll talk soon. Thank you.
Thanks for joining. If you've been inspired by this show, would you help spread the word? If you take a moment to review and subscribe, others can find us more easily. Find out how at delightyourmarriage.com/iTunes. Until next time, live with love, wisdom, and passion.